someone's level of accountability and level of empathy towards the other person is a real indicator if we are dealing with someone simply with some attachment issues or we're dealing with narcissism. And it starts to show up in other aspects of their life when there's relationships involved. These sort of problematic relationships are going to start popping up in other areas of their life because they don't like authority, because they desire to have power and superiority, because, they hyper control their lives. Whereas someone with attachment issues, it's really just going to show up in their romantic relationships.
What's up, YouTube family? Real quick, if you could just like, comment, subscribe, that helps out the show so much. Now, let's get into it.
The SelfHype Podcast.
What's up, y'all? It's your boy Eli Vasquez, and welcome to the SelfHype Podcast, brought to you by Chobo Studios. And I am so excited to introduce Dr. Sarah Hensley to the show. Yeah, because we're talking attachment, we're talking avoidance, how to date an avoidant, what warning signs to look for, how to take responsibility of your own attachment style. And Dr. Sarah Hensley has a PhD in this stuff. She has a PhD in social psychology and has been studying the science of relationships for over 15 years. She's an expert in attachment science and has accurately been able to predict relationship behavior. She's all about, attraction and attachment, and she's worked with thousands of clients to sustain and create healthy love. Now, I'm excited to dive into it. Let's get started. I think what's going to make this episode really interesting is that why I love your content is that I check myself so much because I am an avoidant. And every time I watch it, I'm like, oh my God, she's like speaking to my soul. It's like, you're like pushing me up against the wall. And I'm like, these are these qualities and these are these fears and these are these things. So I want to dive into attachment styles. I want to dive into that avoidance. I want to dive into all that, but also couples and everything else. But you're a pro. You've been in the game for nearly 20 years talking about all these things. But at the end of the day, thank you for being here, Sarah. How you doing? How you feeling?
I'm doing really well, feeling good. I love doing what I do every day. I wake up and I think I can't believe I figured out how to do something that I love, something that I know a lot about, and then something that also makes a living for me. So it's a blessing.
That's amazing. Oh, I love that you're waking up in that gratitude. You're waking up in that blessing after much hard work, because with the podcast and the coaching and the hybrid and we're going to dive into all that. But it's beautiful to see. But what I'm curious about is you dedicated your life towards something that is very important, very special, but also very particular in terms of interpersonal relationships, couples, attachment style, all that. I'm curious, why choose this and not like stocks and, banking or something? Like, what was that aha moment that made you get this shift that I want to dedicate myself to helping in the love and dating space?
So it really came from the fact that my first marriage was such a dumpster fire. It was so painful and there were so many problems. And I got married when I was in graduate school. And I actually started in graduate school looking at psychosocial stress, including intimate partner stress, and how that affected the body and how it affected the immune system. And there was so much research showing that relational stress was sort of a more powerful source of creating disease than any other type of stress. And I found that really interesting. I was like, okay, the stress that we can have with people that we're close to can create so much damage in the body. Then that kind of led me to, well, how does it create damage in the psychological sense? And then when I started really getting deep into the dynamics of romantic relationships after graduate school, I was like, wow, attachment theory does such a good job compared to all the other theories that have been put out there and posited. Attachment theory has stood the test of time, meaning that we've had thousands of empirical studies showing that these attachment styles appear across cultures, across genders, across circumstances, and that they really do a good job of predicting how and why people behave the way they do inside of relationships. So I was really trying to use that information to fix my marriage. Wow. It wasn't necessarily a professional goal of mine at that point.
Wow.
And I started getting deep into studying narcissism and dark personality traits inside of relationships, abuse dynamics inside of relationships, because that's what I was experiencing. And I just got a passion for it. And as I was learning more and more and more about attachment, I was like, oh, well, I know what my issues are, right?
Yeah.
And it was very crystal clear what my issues were. But I think the profound thing was that...
What's up, y'all? I know you guys are enjoying the show, but real quick, I just want to talk about the Patreon. Patreon, you get early access to episodes, bonus content, and you could even ask a question that gets on the show. It's patreon.com/selfhype. Now, let's get back to it.
But I think the profound thing was that I had all this information about what my issues were, but there was not a lot of clear cut direction coming from the science on how do you fix that.
Yeah.
Right? There's different therapeutic approaches and things like that, but there was no real solidified body of evidence of really what works. So I started following the science because I really was like, I want to know, how do I fix me? I was in therapy. I'd been in therapy for years and years, but I was still choosing partners. Even after my divorce, I was still choosing partners that were dismissive, avoidant, or narcissistic. And I thought, there has to be some way to fix this. Why am I attracted to these people? I had to take responsibility for the fact that I was choosing these partners, and there's something about me that is driving these choices, right? And driving the attraction to these types of people. So then a lot of really tragic circumstances happened. The father of my kids, my ex-husband, who I'd referred to, he passed away unexpectedly. My mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at the same time. The relationship I was in with a dismissive avoidant that I had been trying to sort of hold up and I was being very codependent in fell apart, and all these things happened at the same time. So all of my attachments were removed at the same time. And what we know about attachment anxiety is you take away one attachment, you're going to get lots of attachment anxiety. Remove 3 critical attachments, and, my nervous system just kind of like couldn't take that. And I sort of hit what I consider an emotional rock bottom. And it was, I had these grieving children. I had to take care of them. So I was like, I have to find a way to fix this. So the way that I coped with that, and something that I've learned about myself, is that I am somebody that likes to know everything there is to know. And I felt like I descriptively knew what was wrong, but in terms of the mechanisms of fixing it, I was yet to discover. And there was a lot of differing opinions on what to do. There's different coaches and therapists saying different types of things. So I just became my own guinea pig, and I would pick things and I would dive into it and pour into it. And then I would say, do I feel better? Right? Like, do I feel better? I tried to be sort of my own subject. And I really, through all of that self-work, really pared it down to some fundamental critical tools at the level of thought, at the level of emotion, and at the level of behavior, because the entire human experience is just those 3 things: thoughts, emotions, and behavior. There's nothing else in the human experience. And so I was like, we have to change things at every level. So I did that. And after I sort of self-experimented, I went back and tried to look at the science behind those tools that I felt were most effective. And I felt like the science behind them was emerging and was fairly convincing. And so, at that time, I was really getting close to God. And he just said, you got to turn this from a knowledge game and a personal self-help game to a giving it to the world game. Wow. That's what your mission is, to give it to the world. So, many years ago, I just decided to sort of start this side business of seeing clients as a coach. And it took off relatively rapidly. I was the director of a clinical psychology program at a university, an associate professor. I was actually getting ready to walk into tenure when I told my boss, the dean of the college, that I was quitting to run my business full time. And that was a scary move, but it's paid off. And I love what I do, and I'm not going to look back.
God damn, you're good at talking about your story. Oh my gosh. I was just like collecting like 14 questions just based on what you were saying. That's phenomenal. And it's beautiful. I mean, obviously heart-wrenching with these experiences that you had to go through, but there is something beautiful because you face who you are, like who you always were. And it forces you to face yourself. And it's beautiful to hear what came on the other side of that after, various degrees. And for you to challenge yourself so intently and to see that science and to see all that and take that responsibility, which I think is really important too, of like, how do I shift? How do I change? Where is all this coming from? Just thank you for having the audacity, because now we're here and we get to be blessed with everything that you get to share with us. I do want to hit on something that's really important though, because I know there's a lot of lady listeners that are listening, and I'm going to use me as like a test dummy through this whole conversation as an avoidant. But you said narcissism and dismissive avoidant. Now, like, you're on social media, you're making content around this. It's there's everyone saying I was with a narcissist. There's narcissist. So like, is there a way to tell if this person was really a narcissist or just an avoidant that's just scared or dismissive?
I think that there's a way to tell. So there's two types of avoidance. There's the fearful and there's the dismissive. And they are very different. Their wounds are very different. Their needs are very different. Now, where they do overlap is in some of the avoidance behaviors and what those look like. Although the reasons that they avoid are different, right? Yeah. So they might be isolating and going quiet, but the reasons that they're doing that between the two types of avoidance are different. I do feel like the base attachment for narcissism, is fearful avoidance. Most narcissists did have some fairly prominent dysfunction in the parental dynamics between the two parents that raised them. And certainly, usually we see things like significant parentification of a child. We might see excessive criticism of a child. We might see a hyper controlling parent. And narcissism, there's a lot of different types of narcissism and they can look a lot different. But the fundamental sort of core aspect of all of the different types of narcissism is this lack of empathy and this desire to have power and to control and to manipulate the people in their lives in order to feel safe, right? And so I think the primary way to tell, am I dealing with a narcissist or am I dealing with somebody who's just, say, has fearful avoidant attachment or dismissive avoidant attachment, is one, their capacity for empathy. And narcissism is on a sliding scale, right? We can have people that have traits. They're not necessarily disordered, all the way up to people who are what we call NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, that the likelihood of changing even with significant intervention is pretty much slim to none. Wow. 99% of all people diagnosed with NPD that go into therapy fail. So you've got a literally 1% chance of somebody with NPD actually changing themselves and making progress in their disorder. So it's very, very difficult to treat when we get to that level. So people that have, say, fearful avoidant attachment, they may make moves in, say, conflict that is that are manipulative, that are controlling, that are mean, that are spiteful. But the reasons that they're doing that are totally different from the reasons that the narcissist does it. So fearful avoidant might be mean or controlling in conflict because their betrayal wound has been activated and their deepest desire is to be understood. And so their subconscious is like, well, we have to level the playing field. They hit me, they tore me down, they betrayed me. And so in order for them to deeply understand me and for us to have connection and work this out, I need to hit back. And although that's a dysfunctional strategy, it's not coming from a desire to control. It's coming from a desire to be understood and to connect, right? And I'm not saying that's not dysfunctional. It is, right. But it's not coming from the desire to control. And usually, I will say the fearful avoidants are really good at, once they've had time to calm down and to regulate their nervous systems, they come around and take some responsibility and accountability. Right. Whereas the narcissist, the reason that they're doing it is to control you, to have power, to have superiority, right, to make you feel small, right? So that they can keep you down and they can have control over you in the situation. And then you will never hear them apologize, right? Even if they come around and try to give some half-hearted apology, it always turns back around to why it was your fault in the beginning and why you pushed them to that level. But usually they can't even take any accountability for it. They will deflect, they will blame shift, they will do anything and everything to avoid talking about how they responded. And so I think someone's level of accountability and level of empathy towards the other person is a real indicator if we are dealing with someone simply with some attachment issues or we're dealing with narcissism. And narcissism is more of a stable personality trait the farther you run down the spectrum, meaning that it's integrated into one's personality and it starts to show up in other aspects of their life when there's relationships involved. So a narcissist is going to say, have problems with their child's soccer coach, right? They're going to have some discord with the soccer coach. They're going to have some issues with a colleague at work that they disagree with, right? These sort of problematic relationships are going to start popping up in other areas of their life because they don't like authority, because they desire to have power and superiority, because, they hyper control their lives. Whereas someone with attachment issues, it's really just going to show up in their romantic relationships. Right. It doesn't show up as strongly in other less intimate relationships in their lives. So that's one.
God, you're just spitting bars. I love this. And selflessly, I'm collecting data here of just like thank God I'm not a narcissist. So I'm like, because it's easy for me to feel broken. It's easy for me to feel like I'm the problem. But the fact that I feel that way shows that there's some sort of hope versus the narcissist that is like, well, you did this and that's why I feel this way and da 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 da, you know. And I like that you, and this is what we have to check as well for listeners, is because there's a lot of women in the Delulu Resort and Casino just kicking it, and all they hear with what you said was, well, they went through a hard childhood and they went through things that weren't okay and they went for the great, but it doesn't mean you deserve that disrespect and not having a proper partner, right? So that's something to hold on to too, because it's really easy to be like, I can fix them. You know, that's the thing. Yeah, something to be aware of.
I tried and I learned the hard way.
Wow.
You can't. And you can't control anyone else. You can't. Even people who aren't disordered, you can't control.
Yeah.
And we have fake belief that if we just try harder, if we just do something different, then we can directly control someone. And we can't. You know, people have their own autonomy. They operate on their own volition. We can't force or control anyone or make anyone do anything. Now, I do say that for a lot of relationships, we can, when we become securely attached, set up the optimal environment for people to thrive, right? So we can learn about our partner's attachment. We can learn what are their biggest pain points, what are their biggest needs, and we can use that information as data to learn how to love them in a unique way that feels good to them. But that isn't an attempt to control or change anyone.
Interesting. This is really important to talk about because it hits on this level of how much responsibility do I have for their attachment and how much, like, what does that look like in terms of, because I love what you said is like, well, they're avoidant and I want them to be like me. Like, I need them to be like me, or because it's the way I understand and that's how I digest and all that. But in reality, it's having that open communication and dialogue to be like, this is how I work, and that's learning to love each other with this level of security and respect and consideration for each other is what you're saying.
Right.
Got it.
Absolutely.
That's
your job as a partner is to learn how to love someone in a way that they want to be loved.
What's up, y'all? I know you guys are enjoying the show, but real quick, I just want to talk about the Patreon. Patreon, you get early access to episodes, bonus content, and you could even ask a question that gets on the show. It's patreon.com/selfhype. Now, let's get back to it. That's
your job as a partner is to learn how to love someone in a way that they want to be loved. Now, if the way that they want to be loved is somehow crossing your boundaries and making you feel bad, then you're in the wrong relationship, right? And you need to make a decision to draw your boundaries and keep those boundaries and walk away. But I think one of the comments I hate most on my videos sometimes is, well, you're asking people to walk on eggshells. No, I'm not. I'm asking people to learn how to communicate non-critically. I'm asking you to know that if your partner is someone who, say, is dismissive avoidant, whose nervous system, until they get help, only can regulate in isolation, that they become dysregulated and when they're with you, when there's conflict, and they need to go off by themselves to process because they're extremely slow emotional processors. When you start chasing them around the house and forcing them to talk to you, and then you tell yourself this negative story that they must not care because they don't solve it right away, then what you're doing is, one, you're pushing them further away. So you haven't learned about how to love them in a correct way, right? And then number two, you're breaking your own heart by telling yourself a false story that they don't care about you. No, what's really happening is that in their internal blueprint that was formed in childhood, their nervous system doesn't know how to reach safety until they go off and isolate. Now, I'm not saying they don't have some kind of responsibility to recognize that and maybe work more towards co-regulation. Yes, they have that responsibility. But at the same time, then you also have a responsibility to say, hey, I see that you're shutting down right now. If you need to take some time to go think about these things, I'm supportive of that and I love you. And when you return, I want you to know that my goal here is to not criticize you, but to solve this in a loving way that feels good to both of us. Well, that's a secure way to show up, right? That's a secure way to show up. The non-secure way, the anxious way to show up is to chase them around and be like, why won't you talk to me? And why are you avoiding me? And you must not even care. You just want to run away. You never want to fix anything. Well, all that does is dump way more criticism onto them, make them feel way more defective than you've already started to make them feel in the conflict. And then you wonder why they stay away for days instead of an hour, when they might just be gone an hour. If you give them the permission to, hey, I know this is what you need, and I want to meet that need for you to go regulate. And then I'm willing to be patient and regulate myself. and my own attachment anxiety while you do that. That's how we show up secure, right? But the attachment anxiety, people believe that anxiety somehow outweighs someone's avoidance when both of them are trauma responses. The anxious person is required to regulate their anxiety by themselves, just as the avoidant is required to regulate themselves while they engage with the other person in co-regulation. We need self-regulation and co-regulation for a relationship to work.
I love that you said that, because I'm sure the anxious person is like, well, then I always have to cater to them all the time. And what about my needs? And what about me sitting here? But like, that's the thing. They know they're with someone who's anxious as well. And there's a level of responsibility for that and acknowledgement to know that that's the case too. So I'm sitting in it with you. I'm hearing you. I'm listening to you. I have my hand, I'm putting my hand on your hand just to know that I'm there, even though I want to run away so badly, but I know you're going to give me the space to do so eventually. You are like calling me out to a T with this. It's like, and I thought I was just so broken. And again, it's like, cause like conflict, my brain shuts down. I just like, I'll listen and I'll be like, okay. But I need that walk for 20 minutes and then I'm able to breathe and I'm like, or even after the argument's over, it'll be like 3 days later. I'm like, you know what? I really wanted to bring this up. I didn't feel too good about this, or man, I should have brought that up. But in the moment I just need to get on the other side of this conversation. And to bring that up in a way where it's like, hey, I'm not bringing this up to stir up problems again. It's just the way my brain works. And I just would love to hit on these certain things just so I feel like a level of calm in me. But yeah, it's having that partner that can hold your hand through that and you hold theirs, which is so imperative. That's pretty remarkable, because I think a lot of people in social media, like, because I scroll and I'm sure you see it too, especially being in this world, that there's a lot of ladies that just think avoidants are like, you can't date them. Like, it's just stay away, don't date them. It's a lost cause. That's just it. Like, is that the case? Or is there like, what should we be looking out for someone who is an avoidant that is worth dating?
Right. So let's take the dismissive avoidant, because it sounds like that's kind of what you feel like you are and what you're describing as the DI. Attachment is also on a spectrum. So we have people who are mildly insecurely attached, meaning they have a lot of secure traits, a secure foundation, but under significant stress, they might go to those trauma responses of avoidance. And then we have people that are significantly insecurely attached, meaning kind of no matter how you show up, how secure you show up, they're going to need to do their own work. They're going to need to really dive deep into what's going on with them and do the work around that, or you're not going to see progress. So my strategy with my clients is usually like, number one strategy, we're going to control what we can control, which is you and how you show up. And not only is that going to benefit your relationship, most likely, but it's going to benefit how you feel, right? We want to reduce your attachment anxiety, right? While you're loving this dismissive avoidant person. And then as you show up less anxious and more secure, you are going to trigger them less, right? When you learn how to give them empathy and compassion, guess what? That's modeling. And human beings learn largely through modeling, right? So if you model to them when they are vulnerable, compassion, understanding, patience, listening, even when it's hard for you, even when they're criticizing you, if you can go, okay, I understand what you're saying. And I hear that you feel bad about this. And I'm recognizing that when I did this thing, you felt that thing. Then they're going to be able to start learning that that's what's required in this relationship, right? And so there is this social psychological principle of one, commitment and consistency. People desire to be consistent. And so if you start showing up consistently, you're modeling consistency, right? You're like sort of triggering that human desire to remain consistent. And then two, there's reciprocation. So there's this human aspect of reciprocation that we've studied. And we know when someone gives you something good, it's more likely they will reciprocate back. So if you give compassion and empathy and you give understanding and patience and all of those things, you're more likely to get those things back. And where I think the anxious person really screws up with the avoidant person is that they are asking for stuff from the avoidant that they are not giving in the relationship. Like they're asking to be seen, heard, and understood. But when the avoidant does occasionally open up and give vulnerability, they don't like that. They don't like the criticism. So they're like, you're wrong. This, blah, blah, blah. And what does that teach the dismissive avoidant? I never should have opened up in the first place. I was just going to get, pulverized in the process. And then another thing we have to think about is the fact of how quickly people that are, for example, fearful avoidant, which is what I was, can process emotions and understand how they feel. They are so hypervigilant, and their trauma has created a brain that has to think fast.
Wow.
Am I safe? What's going on? What are the cues that I might not be safe? How am I feeling about that? And what do I do with it? Right? So a fearful avoidant can slice and dice their emotions so finely. They can be like, you're making me feel so rejected. I feel so insignificant to you. I'm so disappointed that you did this thing. And the dismissive avoidant is standing there going, I don't even know how I feel, let alone what to do with that. Right? Brain goes up into this trauma freeze response. Yeah. And so then the anxious or the fearful avoidant will go, well, how do you feel? And the dismissive avoidant will go, I don't know. And they take that as you must not care about me if you don't even know how you feel right now. That tells a lot, right? If you don't even know how you feel, you must not love me. But the dismissive avoidant is being totally honest. And what if they could put their feelings better into words? They would say, I can't think right now. My brain is frozen. You have frightened me to the point where I have jumped into a level 2 freeze, right? And you are outwitting me right now. You are outthinking me right now. And I can't keep up with that. And the only way I can cope is if I go off by myself, which is how my nervous system regulates, and I process through this information. And then I might be able to see what you're talking about. But right now, it's like you're speaking a foreign language and you're just yelling at me, right? Yeah. It is not indicative that they don't care. It's indicative that they're unable to process in that moment. Yeah. And so, and then I get the comments that are like, you're defending the DA bad behavior. And I'm like, listen, I'm not. I'm just telling you that it's in blueprints. You can demand all day long that person speak to you when they're in that freeze state, but you're not going to get anywhere.
Right. There's, and it's funny because even that response is kind of hitting on exactly what you're talking about. It's like, why are you defending him and all that? I'm like, I'm literally trying to show you how they work so you could better communicate your needs and you're getting what you want. It's just, there's just another human being that you're talking to from a different just life and why they are the way they are. And I think it's easy for us to think, well, you don't love me. You're being selfish. You don't care. You're not the person I should be with, yada, yada, yada. But in reality, there's a reason why we have these attachment styles. Like we're all kids that went through things that weren't okay and we all process it in different ways, which is really interesting. So it's like, it's giving yourself that moment. And it's so funny how we are as human beings where it's like, we can have these open conversations and moments of emotional neutrality, but like this, we get triggered, and that happens. Then our brain just shifts, and it's interesting where it's like, and even when it comes to couples, I'm curious if you've had couples like when they're in an okay space and you're having conversations with them, but once they have those moments of conflict, it just totally unravels and totally shifts and all that. Like, I guess in terms of couples, say like someone's listening to this and just like, okay, I get it, but we're still bumping heads or whatever. Like, when is it time to see like a third party in terms of remedying this? Like, when should we have this conversation to do this?
Right. When there's consistent evidence that conflicts never come to resolution.
Yeah.
Right? So, for example, in the anxious avoidant trap, if we have an anxious preoccupied person or a fearful avoidant who is very much in the anxious space, and we have a dismissive avoidant or a fearful avoidant who's in the dismissive space, and they are consistently in that anxious avoidant trap where the avoidant continues to pull away and the anxious continues to demand, criticize, and chase, right? And it's just repeating over and over and over again. And despite understanding what's happening, there's little degree of change. Yeah. And so what I feel like sets me apart from other coaches is that I focus on creating people's capacity to execute the change, to execute what they know they should be doing, right? So you just hit the nail on the head when you said people get triggered, and I call it the trigger cycle.
Yeah.
get triggered. It comes from the subconscious. It notifies the body. The thoughts come in. We have an emotional experience. And then we launch into a trauma behavior like flight or freeze. And you can't white knuckle your way out of that. You can't just say, well, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Right.
It's an automatic survival strategy of the nervous system.
Right.
So if we want to become securely attached, we have to do the work inside of our thought world, on our nervous systems, and in our emotional world to build our capacity to execute patience, compassion, empathy, understanding, validation, all the things that we would do as a good, secure partner. So just a lot of coaches give knowledge. Here's what you're supposed to do. But if we don't build someone's capacity to execute, it's meaningless. And that's the biggest lesson I learned within myself when I was doing work, was that I had all the knowledge in the world. My goodness, I had a doctorate, right?
Yeah.
But I still had no capacity because I hadn't built my capacity. I hadn't used tools to build my capacity.
Wow. I really thank you for putting yourself in that as an example, because I think it's so easy to be so hard on ourselves in terms of this process. And you're totally right. Like, we could digest your content. We could listen to the podcast. We could go into that therapy and listen and hear and gain knowledge. And even you having all this knowledge, but without doing the work when those moments were occurring, which is really that work, it's we're not going to see any progress. So like, you could have all the instructions manual to this IKEA furniture you want, but if you don't put any pieces together, then it's still going to be in just a bunch of pieces. So I love that you use that. And I'm totally example of this. I've been on this journey for a while, and I love talking to people like you and diving into this world. But even then, my brain shuts down. And it's not like, yay, I'm fixed now after knowing all these things. I'm like, no, this is still work that I'm processing. I'm in these moments. I have to have these interpersonal conversations with myself and all that. So that's really helpful. I feel like I do have to hit on this though, because I know there's like, and I'm sure you get this too, of like, it's like, Sarah, I know, and I'm trying, but he just doesn't get it. Like I see that, oh my God, he's an avoidant. But he's like, no, it's just like, I just need to go for a walk, screw you, whatever. Or he just runs out. So like, is how, like, because I get this all the time and it's always hard to answer. And I'm curious if you have thoughts on this, but like, how do we get our partner to get on board of all this, especially if they're not aware and they're not in a space of accountability to even dive into these conversations?
Right. So it comes back to this idea that...
What's up, y'all? I know you guys are enjoying the show, but real quick, I just want to talk about the Patreon. Patreon, you get early access to episodes, bonus content, and you could even ask a question that gets on the show. It's patreon.com/selfhype. Now, let's get back to it.
So it comes back to this idea that we just can't control or change anyone. We can't peel someone's eyeballs back and make them see what they need to see about themselves to want to initiate the work to change. But what we can do is we can, one, focus on how we're showing up and really take a look. Are we setting up the optimal environment?
Yeah.
Are we showing up as a secure person, right? Are we trying to love them in a unique way that's going to foster their best selves to show up in this relationship? So that's step number one. But step number two then is going to be drawing a boundary and holding that boundary. Yeah. Because the only thing for a really severe dismissive avoidant that I have ever in all of my years seen work is when someone holds a strong boundary and they say, you know what? I've done all I can do to show up as well as I can to meet your needs. And unfortunately, you're still not able to meet mine. So I'm going to have to find a relationship that does meet my needs. And then you go no contact and you hold that boundary and you pour into, your own attachment anxiety and your own healing that still needs to be done. No contact isn't used as a punishment. It's not like I'll show you. Yeah. It's that this isn't working for me anymore. And I have to protect my own psyche and my own nervous system from being further dysregulated by this behavior that's not meeting my needs. And then it is only truly when sometimes, I will say for the severe folks, when they feel a sense of loss, that they go. And the dismissive avoidant especially, is always trying to suppress. And sometimes when the loss is painful enough and deep enough, they can't suppress it. And they don't like being in pain. It doesn't feel good to them to be in pain because they're masters at being able to avoid their own pain. But sometimes when the love is that deep and it's that big, the no contact and the loss makes them go, oh crap, like I ruined something I really wanted, right? And a lot of their fears around intimacy, that are subconscious become attached to their partner. Okay. So people think, oh, well, they showed up so well in the beginning of the relationship. I know they can get back there. And I'm like, no, they're not going to go back there. Right. Because longevity has brought up their wounds. Their wounds are triggered by longevity, commitment, closeness, conflict, all the things that happen as you get more serious in a relationship.
Yeah.
And they start attributing their bad feelings to you as the cause.
Wow.
Right. And so then the wounds that are arising and that are attached to you start to suppress their feelings for you. Right? And so then when you go away, guess what? The wounds go away for being, right? Because they were attached to you. They were brought up by the dynamics of the relationship. And so when you're gone, the only thing left is their feelings, and their feelings will start to bubble up, and they can't suppress it. And then they're like, holy crap, what happened? Right now, will some people take that lesson and go, hey, I don't want to feel this way anymore. I want to see where I contributed to this, right? And then they start to do the work. But then we're going to have people, which is very common with this avoidance, just go, well, they weren't right for me. Let me go on to the next person. And then they repeat it and they repeat it and they repeat it. So some DAs have to repeat it enough times and have enough experiences of loss and pain enough times for them to go, okay, maybe it's me. And then we have people that never get there.
Yeah.
They fail to see that their relationships end in the same way over and over and over again.
Wow. You did such a beautiful job just breaking it all down. And I'm sure so many people are so happy of hearing this of like, oh my God, my DA X. I'm like, what are they thinking? Why do they feel this way? Or why are they coming back like months later or what have you? And then also like, I plus one with everything that you're saying. Cause like as an avoidant, I've noticed that I would assume it's the partner or the relationship, but after multiple relationships, I'm like, I'm still feeling this way. It's still these patterns. I'm like, oh no, I'm taking this with me because this is me. And I love love. I'm a romantic. I want that relationship, but there's that fear of vulnerability and letting someone in. So I feel like I'm a dog chasing a car. Then I have it and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. But there is that moment of like, okay, how do I shift? How do I hold myself accountable? How do I take that different action for myself? And that is definitely a level of responsibility, say, as an avoidant that I'm trying to be self-aware of. But I love what you said even earlier, which was, and I was just like, oh my God, if a partner told me this in moments of conflict, I would swoon and be like, I will deal with all your anxiety. It was go off for that walk and know that I love you. And even if you said it when you're angry, go for that walk and I love you. Even if it's like that, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be a little teary-eyed when I go for that walk and I'm going to be like, I love this little bit so much. And I'm going to run back and be like, okay, let's deal with all your anxiety. But it's that little bit that I think is really important. I do want to hit on though, is like, can you make it work? So like the big thing I get is like post breakup and do you do the no contact and say it's been 6 months and they do reach out. It's like, should we get back with our ex? Is it possible to get back with our ex? And if we are going to do that, what are some steps going forward if that is the case?
Yes, it is possible. And I actually have some exciting news that I just made a breakup course, how to get your ex back, which also addresses how to get your ex back, if it's a good idea and how to tell. And that's launching in October on my website. So I'm going to give you a little taste of it here. But if people want more, come October 1st, they will be able to purchase that online course. But I will say, yes, it is possible to make it work. You have to do a few things, though. First and foremost, you have to decide, is it a good idea? Because most people, their attachment wounds are lying to them. Their attachment anxiety is in full force. Attachment anxiety will lie to you in the form of toxic hope. So you have to identify, do I have this toxic hope, right? And in my course, I go through how to tell. We do an exercise together in the course. It's like, here's how to tell. Get out your paper and pen. We're gonna tell. And if it meets these criteria, then okay, maybe go back. If it doesn't, then you need to leave this alone and move forward, right? Because it's probably not going to work if you go back. So that's the first step. The second step is understanding your own attachment, the attachment style of your partner, and working on your attachment. Because if you go in to the relationship again as the same person you were, you are going to trigger your partner in the exact same ways that you just did, right? That partially contributed to the relationship's end. And except for the case where we have a severely abusive narcissistic partner, most of the time, if we're just taking people with attachment insecurities, it takes two to tango, right? Now, that's not always the case. We do have people that are in abusive dynamics, and it is primarily one person's fault. But most of the time, two people are contributing to the mess, right? And so how are you going to go in? If you go back in as that same person and expect the same results, right? Because you can't control whether they've changed or done anything, but you can control whether you've changed. And a large part of convincing your ex that they should get back with you is going to be showing that you are different, right?
Right.
That they can have some sense of security and safety, that you aren't going to return to the person who hurt them and triggered them. Right. And then I think we have to look at, okay, what's the attachment style of your ex? Now, there's no guarantee they're going to show up as a different person. So if they don't, what are your boundaries going to be around that? And there are multiple levels of boundaries. And in my hybrid group coaching, I teach people the different levels of boundaries. We have first level boundaries, second level boundaries, and we have the ultimate boundary of walking away. And so if they show up as the exact same person, are you going to hit them with the exact same type of response with criticism or anxiety or whatever? Or are you going to hold a firm boundary and just say, hey, this behavior doesn't work for me and I need this thing? And then how are you going to hold that boundary? What does it look like? So people have to come in very, very prepared, right? And then you have to know, based upon your partner's attachment style, what is it going to look like for them to creep back in, right? So if your partner was an anxious preoccupied,
right,
you cannot let them go more than 2 weeks in no contact because they're going to be trying to move on with a new partner because new people band-aid their wins. Right. So if you're going to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks and no contact, you're going to have lost the anxious preoccupied. They're not going to want to come back to you because they're going to be excited about a new person. Right. Because that's what they do. The love addicts. Now, if your partner's fearful avoidant, depending upon if they're more anxious or more dismissive, 30 to 60 days is going to be a good no contact before I would attempt to reach out. Right. Because they hold on to a lot of pain and they hold grudges. Yeah. Right. So if you reach out too soon, and they're still in their grudge, you're going to get back a very negative response. And that's only going to probably create another conversation or dynamic that doesn't feel good to your ex, right? And it's not going to feel good to you either. The dismissive avoidant, I've seen dismissive avoidants take as long as 6 months or more to really process enough to feel the loss and to feel motivated to returning. And even when they do return, they return in such a slow manner that sometimes it doesn't work because they want to create, more often than not, a situationship when they return. They want to still remain in contact. They want to get the hits of validation and they want you to meet their needs. But they're very scared of going back into the level of commitment that they had prior, right? So I have to warn people that if your partner was DA, what they're going to do, they're so predictable. They're going to come slow. They're going to be flirtatious. They're going to want to have that connection. And you're going to be ramped up as an anxious person, ready to go for it, right? Ready to fall right back into being exclusive, to being intimate, to being close. And they're going to be like, I want to dip my toe in it every now and then, but I really just want to stay back here in this no commitment, no label situation. So it's complicated, right? Getting back to your ex totally depends on their attachment style. It totally depends on your attachment style and what dynamic is going to play out. And you have to be prepared to have done the work, to show up secure and to be able to hold boundaries in order to make sure that the cycle that was created previously that led to the breakup is not going to repeat.
Goddamn. All right. Everyone needs to get this course. Everyone needs to get on this course because this was the taste. Oh man, this was fantastic. And I thank you for breaking down each attachment style. And I think it's really important to kind of ask yourself, okay, who was I with and everything else, but also does this serve me? And if I do want to go back to this, then what's the level of responsibility that I need to set for myself in terms of boundary setting, in terms of how I'm going to show up different? And I think that's the hard thing too, especially if you break up with someone and you want to go back with them, but also you guys broke up for a reason. So it's like, I'm going to change, but also we need to change. And it's easy for them to be like, well, you broke up with me. But it's like, that's kind of the responsibility of two people coming back together, of making that work. And it has to be different. Like, that's the big thing, is making it different. Oh man. Yeah. You broke that down beautifully. I think that's phenomenal. I'm curious if there's, so say like I'm starting to date, like what are some things I should be looking out for, to know if they're like, whatever the attachment style is, or in general, like what should I be looking out for in the early stages of the dating to know if this is someone I should continue to pursue or not, if there is any?
Yes. So there's some key questions in the first few dates that I would ask somebody. I would ask somebody,
what's up, y'all? I know you guys are enjoying the show, but real quick, I just want to talk about the Patreon. Patreon, you get early access to episodes, bonus content, and you could even ask a question that gets on the show. It's patreon.com/selfhype. Now, let's get back to it.
So there's some key questions in the first few dates that I would ask somebody. I would ask somebody, so what kind of books do you read or podcasts do you listen to? Like, do you follow people? Like what kind of people do you follow on social media? Like, you want to see, what are they really trying to pour their attention into, right? Are they following, like, are they obsessed with being in the gym and just getting buff? Are they obsessed with their business and just finances? But is there anything related to personal growth and development and becoming a better human being emotionally and mentally? That is a key indicator that you have a growth-minded person and someone that is willing to look within themselves and say, how can I learn more about myself to become a better human being, to become a better relationship partner? If there's nobody in, their feed, so to speak, that is speaking to those things, and they're just focused on getting jacked or making money or, whatever it is, and there's no indication that they have any interest whatsoever in personal development, it would be a no-go to me, because that means that when there is a conflict, they're going to be more likely to dig in their heels and be like, no, this is you and not me, because they're not interested in being introspective, right? That might be painful for them. It might bring up shame for them, and that's why they avoid it. So that's a key question and something that I look for. I would never date someone ever that didn't say, I really love this person. And like, even if it's like the Tony Robbins or, whoever it is, right? That's talking about how to better yourself mentally and emotionally, right? So that's a question. Another question I ask, or I tell my clients to ask, I'm married now, I don't have to deal with this thing.
Out of the game, but yeah.
Happily out of the game. But for those that are in the game, I would ask, tell me how you got over your last relationship. What did you do to move on? I did this with my dismissive avoidant partner that I dated after my divorce, and his answer was a huge red flag to me, and I knew it was a red flag, and I ignored it anyway, and this was part of the not having the capacity to execute what I knew was right. But he said, I don't know, I just did. I didn't have a choice. What do you do? I just did. I just woke up and decided I was going to be over it. And to me, that went ding, 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 emotional suppression, no work, shove it down and move forward, right? Learn no lessons from what I did and move on, which wasn't the right person. So, well, that happens and I'm just going to move forward and get over it. But if that person goes, you know what? It was difficult, but I had to really rely on my faith. I went to therapy. I started reading about this thing. I started reading about relationships and what my role was in it. And I recognized that we both contributed to it. And ultimately it wasn't right. We couldn't fix it, but I wanted to be able to not repeat mistakes. And so I did some growth work. I did some movement in that area, right, of personal growth and self-development. So if somebody looks at you and goes, either, it was all my ex's fault, right? Yep. Red flag number one, right? I mean, like I said, there are cases of serious abuse where that is true, but you'll figure that out, right? But I would consider it a red flag until you know otherwise or have proof otherwise, because that tells me you're not looking at yourself. You're just playing the blame game and you're pointing the finger at the other person. And then if they say, I don't know, it just is what it is, I'd be like dismissive avoidant. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it. And they didn't want to talk or think about it in the breakup either.
Yeah.
They just wanted to shove it down and they wanted to move on, and they're hoping that someone else will be more compatible with them.
I used to tend to say it is what it is quite a bit. I mean, not in this specific context, but I is like, oh, it is what it is. I know.
It's the favorite PA phrase. It is what it is. And there are things in life where it is what it is because we can't control everything in life.
Right.
But we can control how we respond to things.
Mm-hmm. No.
Right. And how did you respond? It is what it is. So I just turned my attention away from it, or it is what it is. But I want to see how I can move forward in a positive direction and become a better person as a result of what happened, or learn the lessons I needed to learn as a result of this relationship to become a better person.
That's true. Yeah, no, I think that's such a beautiful way to set it, because it's like, it takes your ego out of it too. It's like, it's so easy to hear like, oh, all my exes were crazy, but you're so fantastic. And it's like, oh, wow, well, I'm better than the last person. But it's like, but in reality, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm going to be crazy too. And also when conflict happens, there's going to be zero responsibility and zero self-awareness and zero open growth mindset to maybe bring a third party in or dive into therapy or think of different strategies or anything. I'm just going to be crazy. And I'm just going to be just like everybody else. That's such a beautiful way where you could still have mimosas and be flirty and just casually ask that question. Because we're still on a date. You don't want to sit them down and with a hard overhead light and be like, "What happened to your ex?" That's smooth. That's
sort of like that. A third and fourth date question, maybe. Yeah. Right. And the first date question might be more like, "Well, who do you follow on social media? Like, what things interest you? Are you interested in whatever type of thing they're interested in, right? Like, who's on your feed? What podcasts do you like? What books do you read? Right. And then I'm going to see, what are they, I've dated people that they're only following bodybuilders and they're only reading nutrition books on how to grow muscle, and they're doing those things. And that's a great thing to have in your life. It's a great goal to be in shape.
Yeah.
But it doesn't tell me a lot about your emotional and character development. It tells me you're focused on your body and you're focused on your image. Now, pair that with someone who's also, listening to Thais Gibson or Tony Robbins or anybody else out there in the personal growth and development space of your character and your emotional life. Then, hey, man, you've got somebody who's just all about self-improvement and body, right?
Totally. No, that's a really great way to look at that. And for the record, I look at Tony Robbins and I look at bodybuilding workout stuff and business finance stuff as well. Personal development, baddie over here, all that. No, it's really dope. I mean, you've been able to, God, it's been so cool to see you just dive headfirst and say this in such a digestible way that we could all understand and hold ourselves accountable for, but also things to look out for. And I think it's really hard in these digital streets where you're on TikTok and you're wondering what is right and what is wrong and what is this and what is that. And I see time and time again with my followers, people asking is these dismissive avoidance and these avoidance and all these other things. But you've been able to lay out such a beautiful path forward of, these are human beings and there's this level of responsibility and accountability, but also on that path of dating them and get to know them, there's that level of responsibility and accountability for yourself, which is really beautiful to say. You've been able to speak on so many of the services you provide, and I'm hyped for that X1. I'm very curious about that, as well as I just love your philosophy, and I love that you've done so much work behind it. Just the capacity and really seeing for people who they are. With all this said, how do we follow you? How do we dive in? How do people listening I need more of Sarah? I need more of her. How do we find you in these digital streets?
Okay. I do have a podcast. It's called the Love Doc Podcast, and it's sort of a branch out from the Dating Decoder, where we focus on not just relationships, but we focus on life stuff too and how that impacts relationships. And then I'm also, the owner and CEO of the Dating Decoder. So they can visit my website, thedatingdecoder.com. You'll see all of my services, my individual coaching, my group hybrid coaching, and the courses that I offer that, you can do just on your own as a self-guided mechanism of healing. And then I also am trying to really branch out on different social media platforms. I'm very big on TikTok, but my Instagram is growing quick. My Facebook is growing quick. I do have an exclusive clients and community group on Facebook that I'm very active in and answering questions and engaging with my clients. So if people want to go to Facebook, they can join that free group and they can interact with me quite a bit. But yeah, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, my website, thedatingdecoder.com, and then the Love Podcast.
Love it. Crushing the game. Out here blessing people. Crazy blessed. I see the crazy blessed in the background. So it's like crazy blessing people in the back. All that. Sarah, and anything else you want to share? Anything else you want to give out there? Anything else?
I just want to say thank you for having me and allowing me to speak on what I'm passionate about. Thank you so much. It's just always a joy for people to say, hey, I'm interested in your content because it's my life's work. I'm very proud of what I do and I love what I do. And, I want to serve, whoever I can serve because I felt like God has put me on this mission to help people love in the way that God has designed us to love with respect and with empathy and with compassion and with care. So anybody that I can serve and help, I certainly want to be able to do that.
Woo, walking in her calling, and we love to see it, and we're all crazy blessed in the process. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I just want to thank Dr. Sarah Hensley for being a part of our space. If you're interested in working with her, learning about her courses, learning about her podcast, all the links are in the show notes. And also, if you want to be a part of the Patreon where we dive deeper with Dr. Sarah Hensley, we talk how to sustain a healthy relationship with our attachment styles. She breaks down the science behind it. So that's for our Patreon subscribers. And if you want to be part of my coaching program, link in the bio too. It's called the Inner Circle, where we check in every single month. You learn new skills in terms of interpersonal healing, calming that nervous system, and what is he thinking. Thank you for listening. I appreciate all of you, and see y'all next week.
The Self-Hype Podcast.